Hello again, everyone. So we're getting down the back stretch of my little Leprethon here, and today it is going to be Leprechaun Back to the Hood. So yeah, just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in, right? However, I have to say that this was surprisingly not as grating of an experience as Leprechaun in the Hood was. I mean, it's not a great movie. It's got some problems that I will touch on in a minute here, but it wasn't as cringy to sit through, even with some of the same stereotyping still cropping up a little bit. This movie is at least made with a certain earnestness, for lack of a better word, that made it more watchable than In the Hood, at least in my opinion. And despite the title, which might lead you to think that this is the one time that there is actually a continuity in the franchise, no, there's not. I mean, the title aside, it has not a damn thing to do with Leprechaun in the Hood. I mean, yeah, I don't know. Why should I be surprised at this point, right? And just to rally off some stats real quick, this was the first Leprechaun film to be produced by Lionsgate after Trimark folded. They produced the previous few. And we had a change in director again, this time Stephen Eromlui. Stephen Eromlui. I'm probably butchering that. I apologize profusely. Takes over as a director and a writer as well. And right away, I was feeling a little bit less apprehensive than I was at the start of In the Hood, if only just because there is one credited writer on this film, and he happens to be the director. So my optimism rose just a little bit that this would at least be a more cohesive and streamlined story, even if it didn't blow my socks off. And it didn't. I mean, yes, as I keep saying, it's a less obnoxious film than In the Hood, but it's still not like an overly good one. First of all, and I hate to keep repeating myself, but going along with the trend that's been occurring over the past couple of movies or so, this was Warwick Davis's final turn as the Leprechaun, and it feels like it. At this point, there's no debating that he was on his way out, and that is the way that he's playing the character here. I mean, he might not be phoning it in, but he's taken a call from someone else. He's in so little of it, and in fact, he has so little to say that you could very easily remove him from this one, and you would have just a very sort of blasé discount Friday slice of life in the Hood film. He doesn't even really have a lot of dialogue. Like, honestly, I'll bet you anything that if you were to make like a record of it, or you let a stenographer keep track of his lines, I don't even know if it would fill up an entire page. Really, I'm not embellishing. At least half of his appearances here consist of him, just essentially being a mute who's like looking at someone or falling over something or sneaking around. And when he does speak, it's something very quick and sparse. Or it might even just consist of him just popping up and pulling a face and making a noise. The same sort of lazy trap that Freddy Krueger fell into in some of the later Nightmare on Elm Street movies. Like, there's nothing clever going on. It's not creepy, nor funny, nor scary, so they're just kind of settling for loud and obnoxious. And it doesn't really help matters that when we do get to see the Leprechaun in this one, they, if you'll pardon my French, essentially render him a little bitch. Like, this is what you would get sort of if you took a character like Elmer Fudd or Yosemite Sam and dressed him up in a leprechaun outfit. Everything is done at his expense. Like, he's popping up and always getting, kicked in the nuts or thrown around or dumped into the trash or falling into a freezer. He is just so unthreatening here and such an incompetent boob that it means that he's completely softened and essentially neutered as a villain. So it means that when he's not on screen, you're not really sort of scared or curious as to when he's going to pop up again, because you know that when he does, chances are he's going to get his ass beat. I mean, honestly, beyond any Looney Tunes characters, like I just mentioned, what he does resemble here more than anything else is a gremlin in a leprechaun outfit, both in temperament in competence and intelligence and appearance. Too bad, because honestly, if I found out that this whole series had been building up to some sort of like backdoor origin story for the Gremlins, I would have just been like, I would allow it. I would totally allow it at this point. I don't get like what Lionsgate was thinking in terms of this production. Like, why would you bother acquiring a property if you're going to turn the face of it into a flat tire on screen? On the other hand, I can appreciate that they were at least sort of making an effort here to try and sort of get back to basics with the franchise in terms of like having more of the trappings and influence of horror choreographed with a little bit more sort of grit and grim tone than the previous couple of films. And they do make some kind of an effort to add a little bit more brutality overall, but most of that is still happening off screen, presumably because of budget constraints. But the way that they manage to at least imply the violence is still done competently enough. The supporting cast is pretty decent. I liked seeing Paige Kennedy and Sticky Fingers turn up in small supporting roles here. I mean, given that this was right around the time that FX was pumping out shows like The Shield and Justified a little ways down the road, it kind of makes sense that those two would probably pop up. I mean, I think that this movie was shot in California like a lot of the other Leprechaun movies were. And these two guys would have been pretty prominent in that sort of like local circuit at that point. And they're just good, very naturally charismatic actors, and they embody that urban lifestyle very effortlessly. I think in Paige Kennedy's case, it might have been a little bit more fun if his character wasn't such a complete bozo. Again, without getting too preachy for my own good, I will just say that the way that this character is written and directed a lot of the time probably was not the sort of thing that at that point was doing the public image of African Americans a world of good. But again, it doesn't bother me the way that In the Hood does when it comes to that stuff, because eventually, as the movie progresses, those kind of antics do calm down a little bit. And the cast in general is just sort of authentic enough, likable enough, and I don't get to say this very often in this series, competent enough that you don't mind spending time with them, even when the story does veer off the beaten path with the Leprechaun more often than it probably should. It's kind of too bad that this movie doesn't feel like it has more heft to it, because it does feel like everybody is trying here. With the exception of Warwick Davis's franchise fatigue, it really feels like everyone here showed up and tried to do their best. It's just that on a broader level, it's a pretty blah story. And even if the human story here is drawing on a lot of tropes and cliches in a very low-key and earnest way, they're still tropes and cliches. It's a little bit like being served dry toast for breakfast. You can still probably eat it, but it obviously wasn't made with a whole lot of effort or thought either. Although I will say, after all the silliness of In the Hood, it is nice to see that this movie actually does try to express sincere concern and empathy for African Americans who had to be living in impoverished neighborhoods and projects at that point in time. It's a good way of bringing the series back to that original pull of the gold and the greed and its corrupting influence, while also managing to be vaguely topical without being preachy or too on the nose about it. You do get a little bit of fun violence and calamity in the back half of the movie. You get a couple of different people having scuffles and fisticuffs with the Leprechaun, all of which are actually surprisingly well choreographed for the budget. I mean, this isn't anything on the level of a John Wick or The Matrix or anything like that, but it's better than I would have expected. In fact, the only time the writing gets truly goofy and also shamelessly plagiaristic is at the point when one of our heroes pumps the Leprechaun full of bullets that have clovers stuffed in their tips. So far, so good, okay? But as he's blasting away at the Leprechaun, dude says, "Say hi to St. Patrick's, bitch." Or something like that. But, I mean, yeah. For those of you who thought that it wasn't dumb enough when Busta Rhymes said "trick or treat, motherfucker" to Michael Myers a year earlier, here's another one trying to jump on that same bandwagon and slipping on a big-time banana peel. So for all its earnestness, this movie does manage on the basis of that scene to score another Jameson Award nomination. Congratulations. With honorable mention to the way that they try to get around having anyone drop the N-word in this movie by having gangsters and other people in the projects encourage and inform each other that rather than that, they can refer to each other from now on as ninjas. Which, of course, means that you get a scene where the leprechaun strolls up and says to a whole crowd of people, "What's up, ninjas? Ho, ho, ho." But I think on some level, everyone involved must have sensed that that was a bit stupid, because after a certain point, I sort of seem to remember the movie just kind of abandoning that little gimmick and joke. I do think it's better than In the Hood, but conversely, it's still more forgettable. I mean, I may not have liked In the Hood, but I'll never forget it. On the other hand, I feel like a couple of months from now, there is not much of anything in Back to the Hood that I'll be able to remember with any real crisp clarity. There's the foundation here for something that would be fun or at least serviceable, but that's not really what we ended up getting. This is just not a movie that in its heart believes in itself and thinks that it's necessary. Which is too bad, because after all the work and dedication that Warwick Davis put in, I would love to see him go out and depart the series on a high note, but unfortunately, he ended with a whimper. Of course, at this point, the whole franchise kind of went dormant for about 10 years until it was rescued from the depths of hell by our good friends at WWE, who decided to reboot it with Hornswoggle as the Leprechaun. I keep asking this question, but with Vince McMahon involved, what could possibly go wrong? Unfortunately, this was just a very sort of stale watch. It was like looking at a really washed out version of a pretty alright painting or something. It's hard to describe, but yeah, unfortunately, going out on a down note here. But thank you so much for watching. Hopefully I'll have a more enthusiastic discussion when it comes to Leprechaun Origins, whether I like the movie or not. Stay tuned, and I will catch you all soon.